Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're beginning our season preview series. We did this a couple of years ago, we did this last year, we're going to do it again this year. We're looking at all 32 NHL teams and how they improved in the offseason, looking at last year and looking ahead to this upcoming season, including my predictions for this upcoming season. In today's video, we're looking at the Habs and the Bees, with all the updates from the past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. So in today's video, we've got another season preview series to do. So today we're going to be looking at the 2025 season preview series, the preview of each and every team for the 25-26 season. So basically, we're going to look at their previous stats from this last season. We're going to look at how they improved in the off season, and I'm going to give you my predictions and my gradings for the teams for this past off season. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts when I'm done with this. But today we're looking at the Habs and the Bruins. We're going to start with two teams from the Atlantic Division and arch rivals, two original six teams. So in today's video, these are two teams we're talking about. So we're going to start off with the Montreal Canadiens. So the Canadiens last year finished with a record of 40-31-11 for 91 points. They were 5th in the Atlantic Division, 8th in the Eastern Conference, just ever so slightly squeaking into a playoff spot, and 17th in the Eastern Conference. Had they been in the West, they would have missed the playoffs, but they were in the East, so they made the playoffs. So very interesting note there. They had 243 goals for, 261 goals against, so they were a -18 during the season, which wasn't overly great. Nick Suzuki led the team with 89 points, followed by Cole Caulfield, who had 70, and Lane Hutson, who had 66. While Cole Caulfield led the team with goal scoring with 37, Suzuki had 30, and Gallagher had 21. So Lane Hutson was a pleasant surprise, one of the Calder Cup finalists, while Suzuki, Caulfield, once again, the point drivers on this team. So very interesting note there. They made the playoffs for the first time in I think 3 or 4 seasons, only to lose to the East winning Washington Capitals in 5 games in round 1. So it wasn't an overly great end to the season for the Montreal Canadiens, but for a young team who wasn't expecting to make the playoffs, it was a nice breath of fresh air for the Habs. Caulfield led the team in the playoffs with 3 goals, while Dvorak, Suzuki, and Slafkovsky were tied for second with 2, and then Lane Hutson led the team with 5 points, and Caulfield was second with 4. So very interesting note there. And even though they didn't win the playoff series, they at least got some experience. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to the team's off-season adds and their off-season subtractions. So if you look at their adds, they added Joe Veleno from the Seattle Kraken in free agency, Sammy Blais from the AHL in free agency, Zachary Bolduc in a trade from St. Louis, Noah Dobson in a blockbuster trade from the Islanders, Mark Delgazio in free agency from Nashville, Kakinen in free agency from Florida, and a 2026 7th round pick from Carolina. And in exchange, they lost Armia in free agency to Los Angeles, Heineman in a trade to the Islanders, Dvorak free agency Philadelphia, Pizzetta free agency Toronto, Barrett-Boulet free agency Colorado. They traded Logan Mailloux to St. Louis, they traded Kaden Primo to Carolina, and they traded their 16th and 17th overall picks that they had, their own and the Calgary Flames, and in 2025 first round to the New York Islanders. So interesting note there. They did lose a couple more things than they added, but the players that they added were a whole bunch better than the players that they lost. So they did lose a little bit more players than they added, but still the Habs had a pretty dang good offseason. Like, you add Noah Dobson to replace a guy like Logan Mailloux on the blue line, like that's a massive upgrade. Mailloux wasn't even an everyday NHL player last year. You had Zachary Bolduc, Joe Veleno, Sammy Blais to replace Armia, Heineman, Dvorak, Pizzetta, and Barrett-Boulet. Like I said, a little bit lost depth, but still, Bolduc's going to be a lot more impactful than guys like Dvorak and Armia were last year. In that, they swap out Kakinen for Primo, which is a little bit of an upgrade. So very interesting note there. And they also lost 2 first-round picks in the Dobson trade. They went out making 3 trades, as we just talked about this offseason. Traded Bolduc for Mailloux, acquired Dobson from the Islanders in exchange for Heineman, as well as 2 first-round picks. And they traded Kaden Primo to the Carolina Hurricanes for a 2026 7th round pick. So those were the 3 trades they made. The top 3 draft picks from Montreal Canadiens in the 2025 draft were Zahoski, who was a right winger, 34th overall in the 2nd round, were Papanix, who was a center prospect, 69th overall in the 3rd round, and then 81st overall in the 3rd round, they took Pickford, who was a right shot defenseman. So very interesting note there, once again, because they traded those 2 first round picks. Didn't have too many top end picks that they have, but still with the Habs team that's as deep as they are, they can make do without that. And they did take a couple of really interesting players with those first 3 picks, so very interesting note there. Next, going over to 5 things that I mentioned in my off-season preview video that I think the Habs should do, and I'm just reviewing that. So the 5 things I said the Habs should do this offseason to get better for next year were add a veteran top 4 defenseman, move picks for immediate help, move Dvorak and or Anderson, have Roy, Demidov, Kapanen, and Reinbacher challenge for NHL spots, and add some veteran bottom 6 forwards. So I think they completed the first 2 things that were on my offseason checklist for them. They traded for a veteran top 4 defenseman. I know he's not an overly old veteran, but they traded for an experienced guy, Noah Dobson, who's going to be a mainstay in the top 4 for years to come. And they used their draft capital to acquire immediate help by moving those first round picks for Dobson. So the first 2 things, I was completely right on that. They've done that so far. Then they didn't complete task number 3, in my opinion, which was move Dvorak and or Anderson. Dvorak still has health concerns, and Anderson is still on the team's roster. So unlike what I thought going into the offseason, they didn't move either one of them, at least not yet. The 4th thing I said they should do was have Roy, Demidov, Kapanen, and Reinbacher challenge for NHL level spots. And I think they sort of accomplished that. Like, they didn't bring back too many veteran forwards, and I think guys like Waugh, Demidov, and Kapanen will all have legit shots at making the team's NHL lineup. So I'm going to give them somewhat alright, because they did replace a couple of spots that they could have used for some of the younger players. So they still have a couple of spots available that I think those younger players could push for. So I'm going to say that's a little bit of an even one. And then they also add some veteran bottom 6 help. Like, I mean, they add Blais, they add Veleno, and they add Bolduc. Is that really huge bottom 6 help? I'm not exactly sure, so I'm going to say it's even. They add some bottom 6 veterans, but not a whole bunch. So very interesting note there. But I definitely think they completed 2 of my 5 offseason things that I think they needed to do this offseason, and to some extent did a couple of other ones too. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my current projected lineup for the 25-26 season for the Montreal Canadiens. So as you can see here, my top line is Cole Caulfield with Nuke Suzuki and Yuri Slafkovsky. The second line is Bolduc with Newhook and Demidov. The third line is Josh Anderson with Kirby Dach, so long as he's healthy, and Patrick Laine. And the fourth line is Kapanen, Evans, and Gallagher. Defensively, you have Gouli playing with Dobson, Hudson playing with Matheson, and Xhekaj playing with Carrier. You have Montembeault and Dobes as the 2 goalies, with Waugh, Blais, and Struble the 3 spares. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my predictions for the Montreal Canadiens for this upcoming season. Now, I think a lot of you guys are not going to agree with my predictions for the Montreal Canadiens for this upcoming season, but I had the Montreal Canadiens taking a massive step forward after the additions they made this offseason and winning the Atlantic Division. I have them finishing with a record of 52-23-7 for first in the Atlantic Division. I think some of the younger guys are going to take steps forward. The addition of Dobson is going to be invaluable to that team. Dobes, now after already having a little bit of experience, is going to be a stellar backup behind Montembeault. And I just think everything's going to come together for the Montreal Canadiens. They're going to almost crack the 110-point mark. I think the Habs are going to be one of the scariest teams to face against this year, and I would not be one bit surprised if they were a team who was challenging for top spot in the Atlantic Division. And I personally have them at this point in time getting top spot. So very interesting note there. When it comes to the off season, sure, they lose a couple of interesting pieces. Yes, you don't like to lose Armia, you don't like to lose Dvorak, give up a couple of first round picks, trade young defensive prospects like Maliu, but all in all, adding Dobson's a huge upgrade, Bolduc's a huge upgrade, Veleno and Blair are going to help round out the bottom 6, Kakanen's going to provide some more added goalie depth. All in all, I think the Habs did one of the best off seasons of any of the NHL teams this year. I'm going to give them an A- rating. They had a great season, they were really good, and that's why I'm going to have the Habs with the A- rating. So I think they had one of the best off seasons. They're going to be competing for first in the Atlantic next year. They made some really interesting moves, and I like where the Habs are going. And even though I'm a Senators fan, a Sabres fan, I don't really like the Habs that much. I gotta say they're going to look like my Atlantic favorites at this point in time. And next, going over to the Boston Bruins. So going over to the Boston Bruins, they had a rather bad season last year. They were mediocre. They fired their head coach after just 20 games. They never really recovered, and they finished one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference last year. They finished with a record of 33-39-10 for 76 points. That was dead last in the Atlantic Division. That was second to last in the Eastern Conference and 28th in the NHL. Like, they were not a good team last year. They traded a whole bunch of players at the trade deadline. Like, they were completely a bad team last year. They wound up finishing with 222 goals for, as well as 271 goals against. So while the Habs made the playoffs and were only a -18, the Bruins were a surprising whopping -49 in the regular season, so it was not good there for the Boston Bruins. Missing the playoffs for I think the first time in 8 or 9 seasons, so like it had been a while since the Bruins missed the playoffs. Pastrnak led the team with 106 points. He was followed by Morgan Geekie, who had 57, and then Lindholm and Zacha were tied for throwing the team in points with 47. Meanwhile, Pastrnak also led the team in goal scoring with 43. Geekie, who had a pleasant season last year, had 33 goals, and Elias Lindholm had 17 goals. Not too surprised they missed the playoffs. So very interesting note there. So a very interesting season there from Boston that was definitely subpar comparing to some of their past year's standards. So very interesting note there. Now if you look at the team's offseason adds and losses, very interesting note there. Their adds, they add Tanner Jeannot from LA, Sean Crowley from Columbus, Michael Eyssimont from Seattle, Alex Steves from Toronto, and Jordan Harris from Columbus, all in free agency. They also traded for Victor Soderstrom from Chicago and traded for Victor Arvidsson from Edmonton. So a couple of very interesting adds there. Like Jeannot, Arvidsson, they're going to help round out the middle six. Crowley, Eyssimont could be very solid fourth line guys. And then you got guys like Harris and Soderstrom, who I think could challenge for third pair roles this upcoming season. If you look at their subtractions, they lost Koepke to Winnipeg, Letteri to Toronto, Lauko and Wallstrom, who are both currently UFAs, Wotherspoon to Pittsburgh, Mitchell to Detroit. They traded Moss to Chicago as part of the Soderstrom deal. They lost Bussi to Florida in free agency, and then they traded their 7th round pick in 2025 to Chicago as part of the Soderstrom deal, and their 5th rounder in 2027 to Edmonton as part of the Arvidsson deal. So very interesting note there. They make a whole bunch of trades, but they did make some very interesting adds. Like I think their forward group looks a tiny bit better than post-trade deadline Boston from last year, but still it looks nowhere close to the team who started the season last year. Defensively, you add Harris and Soderstrom, you move Mitchell and Wotherspoon. Like that's really a little bit of a win-win for the Boston Bruins. I think Harris might be a little bit more of an upgrade than guys like Mitchell, Wotherspoon, but still, it's not really that much of an upgrade. And they also lost a couple of draft picks in their trades. They made 2 trades. They traded Mast and a 7th round pick to Chicago for Victor Soderstrom, and then they acquired Vic Arvidsson from the Edmonton Oilers for a 5th round pick. So very interesting note there, like not a whole bunch of trades that were made by the Boston Bruins this offseason, and not a whole bunch of adds, so very interesting note there. If we look at the Boston Bruins' top 3 draft picks from this past season, the first one was their 7th overall selection in the first round, and they took James Hagens. Completely great pickup here to get Hagens dropped to them at 7th overall in the first round. Like that was a really solid pickup here for the Boston Bruins. They also had the 2nd round pick, 51st overall, and selected William Moore, center prospect, a guy who I was thinking could go high 2nd, late 1st rounder. So another steal there, another guy who could challenge for a center spot for the Boston Bruins. And then at 61st overall, they got left shot defenseman Liam Peterson, who eventually I think could challenge like a 3rd pair role, maybe even a 2nd pair role in the Boston Bruins organization. So very interesting note there. Like all in all, one of their biggest weaknesses over the past couple of years has been not having a really solid center group, and you draft more than Hagens with your first 2 picks in this draft. Like that's really great drafting there from the Boston Bruins. Next, going over to just a recap of the 5 things looked at in their offseason preview and how they've come so far. So the 5 ways I thought this team could improve in the offseason to get better for next year were: 1, use the high draft pick they had wisely. 2, add a top 4 defenseman. 3, consider moving Geekie, Zacha, Lindholm, or Zadorov. 4, add a top 6 forward to play with Pastrnak. And 5 was add some bottom 6 help. So the first thing I think they did completely right, they used that high draft pick wisely. Like taking Hagens, 1st round, 7th overall, beautiful move there from the Boston Bruins, and I think they completely hit home on one of my goals for this team for their offseason. The second one didn't really do. Like I said, they need to add top 4 defensemen to offset the loss of Brandon Carlo. They didn't do that. Like they didn't lose any top 4 defensemen after their trade deadline. Like Wotherspoon, Mitchell, they're not going to be that big of losses. And Jordan Harris and Victor Soderstrom, they're decent defensemen. They could be 6-7 guys, but they're nowhere near top 4 defensemen at this point in time. So I do not feel like this team has added top 4 defensemen like I said they should. The third thing I said they think they should do in the offseason was move, or at least consider moving 1 or 2 of Pavel Zacha, Morgan Geekie, Elias Lindholm, and Nikita Zadorov. And they really haven't done any of that. Instead of trading RFA Morgan Geekie, they signed him to a long-term extension. They also kept Lindholm and Zadorov, and there hasn't been really much of any trade discussions about those 2 guys. The one guy who might still be able to make this somewhat of a goal completed for me was Pavel Zacha. He's still being mentioned in the trade rumors. There's a possibility he could be traded later on in the offseason, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But at this point in time, they did not complete that sort of thing for the Boston Bruins. The fourth thing I said, I think this team should do was add a top 6 winger for Pastrnak. You just lost Brad Marchand. A couple of years back, you lost Patrice Bergeron. Like, you don't really have an elite level winger to play with David Pastrnak. So I say they should go out this offseason and add a elite level top 6 winger who could play with David Pastrnak. And I don't think Arvidsson or Jeannot are going to be an elite level winger to play with David Pastrnak. Like, those aren't going to be great moves for the Boston Bruins. So contrary to my belief, they never really added a top 6 forward to play with Pastrnak. So that's another one of my checklists from the offseason preview video that failed. However, they did add some bottom 6 help, which was my 5th thing that I said this team should do in the offseason. They added Jeannot, they added Arvidsson, who should be full 3rd line guys, and then Corrali and Eisman should help on the 4th line. Like, they added, in my opinion, 4 bottom 6 forwards, which I think is really good there for the Boston Bruins, especially given what they lost. So in my opinion, like, I think the Boston Bruins definitely completed that. So I think they completed task 1 and 5 on my off-season preview checklist for this off-season, but they didn't really do anything on my 2nd, 3rd, and 4th off-season checklist. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to the team's lineup. So for this current point in time, my current projected lineup for the Boston Bruins, as you can see here, my top line is Fraser Minton playing on the top line with Elias Lindholm and David Pastrnak. The 2nd unit is Pavel Zacha playing with Morgan Geekie and Casey Middlestat. The 3rd unit is Arvidsson playing with Poitras and Kuznetinov, and the 4th line is Beecher, Kostelic, and Jeannot. That's a pretty decent forward group. Defensively, they'd have Lindholm with McAvoy, Lohrei with Yoki Haru, and Peak with Zadorov. Like, it's not the worst defensive in the world, especially when you have a guy like Charlie McAvoy, but it's not the best of defenses either. Goaltending-wise, you have Swayman and Korpisalo, who would be the goaltending duo, and the spares will be Sean Corrali, Michael Eismont, and Jordan Harris. And I think that will be a decent lineup there for the Boston Bruins. So that's my current lineup projections for this Boston Bruins team for this upcoming season. Next, going over to my predictions for the Boston Bruins for this upcoming season. Now, at this point in time, I don't have very much faith in the Boston Bruins. I know there's some people out there who say they'll bounce back. They're the Bruins. They're going to wind up making the playoffs next year. I'm going to say no. I don't think they did enough this offseason to surpass teams like Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Florida, Tampa, maybe even to some extent Detroit. So at this point in time, I don't think the Boston Bruins are a playoff team. I currently have them finishing with a record of 33, 35, and 13 for only 79 points. It's a couple points higher than last year. It's almost back up to 500, but it's still nowhere close to a playoff spot. I have them finishing 14th in the Eastern Conference, so I still have them being one of the bottom dwellers in the Eastern Conference this year. So very interesting note there, but that's currently my opinion about the Boston Bruins. Like, my predictions for them right now would be a 33-win, 79-point team who's just below 500, so very interesting note there. And lastly, going over to their off-season ratings. So we gave the Montreal Canadiens an A- earlier in this video. I don't like what the Boston Bruins have done. Like, the Jeannot deal, I don't think is overly great. Like, I think the Jeannot will be a solid 3rd, 4th liner in the Boston Bruins organization. He fits that scheme well, but the contract they gave him was not overly great. They did add some decent bottom 6 help, but they had no top 6 forward. They had no top 4 defenseman. Just filled out some small holes with some lower end guys that they got. So at this point in time, I really don't think this team improved. So I'm going to give them a C+ rating. They may have improved a tiny bit, especially with adding some decent middle 6 help in Jeannot and Arvidsson, even if it's just for the short term. But I don't think long term this team's really been helped, and I don't think this team's going to be a playoff team. So I'm going to give them an off-season rating of C+. It's a little bit better than I was expecting, but it's not an overly great off-season there from the Boston Bruins. So definitely, that's what I'm talking for in this video. I'll let you guys thoughts after the off-seasons these two teams have had. What do you think about the Habs and the Bruins? Do you think that the Bruins are going to be another team who misses the playoffs yet again this off-season? And what do you think about the Habs? Could they challenge for first in the Atlantic Division after this offseason? Definitely your thoughts on all of that. And where do you think the Habs and Bruins are going down in the comment section below? That's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and for letting me subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So remember to check that out. Links in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.